Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning as well, afternoon for people that are going to listen to us post the live. Most organizations today, they are currently caught into a dangerous trap. They are trying to solve human complexity with machine logic. The result, 65% of managers are breaking points and decision quality is plummeting. And that data is not coming from me, it's coming from Gallup report 2023-2024. And yes, I will put that information into the comments later. So welcome everyone, I'm Florence Zombrico, and this is From Pressure to Capacity. So this series is dedicated to one mission, helping you stop managing pressure and start metabolizing it into a strategic advantage. And today we're going to ask a very direct question. What is the coaching that your organization needs most now? As usual, feel free to add any comments on the LinkedIn or via the LinkedIn comment. We will see them on the screen and we'll be able to trace them from time to time. Welcome my guest. And today my guest is a man who has seen this shift from the inside of one of the world's tech giants, Jan Walker. Welcome with us, Jan. A few words about you before we get started into that nitty-gritty conversations.
Well, thank you so much, Florence. Bonjour. That's the end of my French, by the way. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this topic with you. It's a fascinating topic. Yeah, my background, I was 15 years with Cisco and then 10 years with Salesforce. So 25 years in tech, and particularly in the last few years saw this transition, particularly now towards AI, agentic AI, in terms of strategy and the impact that that's having on organizations. And so this topic of coaching, I think, is really key. And I now set up my own small consulting company, Authentic Consulting, in order to work with organizations as they deal with these complexities and make this transition from what has been to what needs to emerge, both in terms of organizational structures, but also in terms of how we collaborate more effectively and see the shift in terms of leadership as well. So delighted to be here. Thank you.
So let's see a bit what we see is happening. We had some fascinating vibe of conversation, LinkedIn and live, and we both see that there is kind of evolutions, more transactions, more short term, less long terms. So from the perspective of the inside of hypergrowth tech, when a company stops replacing leadership roles and focuses on transactional return on investment, ROI, what is the first thing that actually breaks in the culture?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And in the discussions I'm having across different industries, I think this is something which is manifesting itself. Once pressure increases, and particularly the pressure on sales increases, what we see is a tendency towards more command and control. So really going backwards in terms of leadership style to what is euphemistically called traditional, more traditional style of leadership, where people are more micromanaged, where constraints in terms of the room to make errors, the room to experiment is actually compressed rather than given greater space. And it's paradoxically actually completely the wrong approach for the moment, which is so worrying and slightly depressing. That is what, as humans, what we tend to do when we are put under increased pressure as a leader. We tend to try and want to control more rather than actually go, actually, I need to elevate my team to be able to deal with this situation. So coaching therefore becomes not only a nice to have, but a necessity in that situation. And we need to move away from that tendency towards wanting to control more through this traditional style and move towards a more coaching style of leadership.
There is something here that's really echo. It's kind of we always have that paradox between, or polarity between short term, long terms. It seems like we have a direct invitation from AI with the speed it invited us to keep focusing on, to move to transactions. Yeah. And transaction thinking definitely moves us to short term versus, so it's more like a short term result versus long term solvability from a perspective of business perspective.
Yeah.
What could be one thing to derail this invitation to transaction that we have at the moment?
Well, I think it's a really key point, and I think that AI itself is actually part of that solution. I think AI offers us now this amazing opportunity to leverage in the flow of work feedback about how we operate and how we think in a very sophisticated way that has never been accessible before. So, for example, in Slack, there is this facility called Slackbot, which observes everything that you're doing in terms of your engagement with your work, and can give you feedback about how you should be thinking and acting differently. And again, depending on the guardrails, the parameters, but if they're linked in, and this is kind of more generically, if they're linked into how you want vertical development to work within an organization, if you can link that into your, whether it's Slackbot or other AI tool, that will then guide and coach the individual leader on thinking less transactionally and going, really, are you taking a short-term or a long-term view with this? And let me help you think more strategically in terms of how you're reacting. So I think AI, as you say, may be causing some of the anxiety, but also I think is part of the solution, because it opens up so many possibilities from a coaching point of view, and in the moment coaching point of view as well.
There is this capacity that AI has to compute data, to do observation on our action. And since a lot of our action are actually on digital tool, yes, we do now have this kind of added tool. I've noticed some of the people, some of my clients using also AI to support their coaching, that there was also, because sometimes the information is so immediate, there is still that lack of taking the time to really process it.
Mm.
The other thing that is interesting is the immediacy that is really creating. And at the moment, we see actually a lot of company, they are deciding to decrease support for people development or people coaching because they identify that AI can replace.
Yep.
Which from my perspective feels completely the opposite of what we should be doing, because I've got this counterintuitive feeling that actually when there is a lot of pressure, you need more support to absorb it, but it's a different type of work you're going to do. What's your take there?
Oh, so interesting. This is such a provocative discussion around this area, but I think so very important, because I agree with you. We're seeing disinvestment in vertical development, and disinvesting in exactly the areas, the skill sets which people should be focusing on, the human skill sets, which are going to be necessary, particularly as we work through, 5 years into the future, when AI is going to be fully embedded in pretty much everything that we do. We're kind of very stuck in the moment in that sense. I like to look 5 years ahead and kind of go, well, what's the world going to look like there? And then that is what is going to distinguish us, our human capabilities, our ability to have critical thinking, our ability to adapt, our ability to communicate and engage, motivate, coordinate, and all these things, which AI is not so good at. And we're disinvesting in that because we're so focused on converting this investment in AI into something which is performance related. And so I think it is genuinely a real challenge. And I agree with you. I think, say, for example, you had, every year you used to bring leaders together, for example, in order to exchange ideas and thinking. Maybe that's now being stopped, for example, or different leadership programs, they're now being converted more into AI development programs, because that's where, the focus is for the company. You're missing then the opportunity to bring leaders together, both to exchange ideas and thinking, but also to take them out of the here and now and give them, 3 days where they can breathe and where they can reflect. And really that's such a gift to leaders. And the problem is that it's being treated as a nice to have, not a need to have. And I think massively undervalued, not only in terms of creating fabric and building fabric within a global organization particularly, or within any organization, but also in terms of allowing leaders to share what's going on with them from a mental health point of view, and understand that other people are going through very similar challenges. And that is immensely liberating and freeing when you bring people together. So it's not just introducing vertical development ideas and learning the ideas, but it's also that opportunity to collaborate and build together and realize that a lot of people are in the same boat. So many levels why I understand why it's happening, but I would also strongly counsel against either or. It's both and. You need the AI education and you need to continue focusing on the vertical development. Sorry, a long response, but I'm very passionate.
Really, and I love the passion. And there is a lot of things in what you said for me that triggered my own passion in some of the comments. There is something you say, it's a nice to have. Today's, I'm actually shocked, I could say shocked, to realize that support and learning and development, it's still seen as a cost and it's still not being seen as a business strategy.
Yep.
I'm still impressed when I have people that realize that the salary of their employee is not actually an investment and they're not even counting that as an investment. So what could help doing that shift from support, learning and development is actually a business element?
Yep.
And there are places you've already seen that shift happening.
So first of all, I 100% agree. I wrote a white paper on exactly this topic of the shift that is needed for L&D, and I'm really interested in looking at this from a maturity curve perspective. The L&D, the traditional model, is regarded as a cost model. It's a kind of order-taking function. That's how it's regarded, rather than a strategic enabler to the success of the business. And so there's a 4-stage model that I think organizations can go through, and we won't get into that now, but I think it's really key to look at L&D as an enabler and as a strategic enabler. But as part of that, there are shifts that the L&D organization needs to make. Part of that is in skill set. I think, L&D needs to be far more AI literate, and needs to be able to speak that language, but it also needs to be business literate. This is the bulk of my career was in business, and only the last few years have I been directly involved in learning development. I've always been passionate about it, and I think that perspective is helpful in terms of understanding then that learning is not just learning for the sake of it. There has to be a business impact. There has to be an outcome, and that's, I think, has been missing historically, is that we've tended to measure things like net promotion score, which is great. You give someone a pizza at the end of their training, of course they're going to say, oh, that was great, I loved it, or that it was just an enjoyable experience. Now that in itself adds some value perhaps, but it doesn't really shift the business, and I think that's what business has been missing in terms of that connection between L&D and business results. Now again, I would add the caveat that the challenges, and it's kind of linked to something we talked about earlier, which is a short and a long term. Vertical development, it does not necessarily result in immediate changes in behavior and immediate performance shifts. It can do, but not necessarily. And I think so that kind of cause and effect is not necessarily that easy to measure. So you have to have a certain element of belief this is the right thing to do. Expanding capability is something which takes time to manifest itself, and particularly to convert itself into business results. So I think it's a really topical discussion point, and something which is really key for all organizations.
We've got one comment from our viewer that pizza has great value, really. And yeah, that's true. There is definitely great value behind it sometimes.
I have 2 teenage sons who would 100% agree that there is nothing more important in life than pizza.
Thanks, Ariane, for the comment. There is quite a few things that definitely there is completely shift in the learning and development space we can create. There is really, for me, an invitation to adopting a different mindset. And I know, for example, that I love starting now with sprints, very short sprints over 5 weeks of time, but different type of KPI to make sure it creates the change, because I see more sometimes a need in change of behavior than in a change of competency. And what I noticed as well is, it's funny, the example you gave with Slack. We do have now, with the new tool, we have the capability to be way more integrating the change and the training into the day-to-day things, which is also for me an extremely high value. because we no longer have this kind of cycle when you go, you learn, and then you have to practice for the job, and then you do the reflect. We still maintain this kind of learning cycle when you have acquire new knowledge, either mindset, competency, or behavior, practice it, and reflect to see what works, what doesn't work. But they have to be way more short. And AI is actually really facilitating that in some places. So would that mean that the 12 months leadership curriculum is dead?
Gosh, is it dead? That's a really, again, another provocative question. I think if I look again 5 years ahead, I think it will be far less common that you have these established programs. I think education as a whole is going to change a lot in the next few years as well, from being this much more static, predictable kind of process to being far more what is needed in the moment, what is needed now. Are there some truisms about leadership which every leader should be building competency in? Yes, I think that's always the case. I actually don't think leadership in itself is going to change. It hasn't changed for hundreds of years. I mean, some of the Romans, Marcus Aurelius, people like that, they're still relevant. Some of the Greek philosophers is still relevant. And all we're doing is seeking to reframe. I think a lot of our leadership gurus, all their reframing is ancient truisms very often. So I think the fundamentals of leadership don't change. However, the way in which they're applied, as you were talking about, the Slack example, I think that's going to be far, far more important, where ideas are introduced in response to how a leader is behaving. And maybe it'll be, hey, in that last meeting, you came across as quite overbearing. You didn't let people speak. You spoke over them. Let me introduce this idea about active listening. And I'm going to teach you 5 minutes on active listening, something like that. And the leader might go, oh, gosh, I had no idea I was doing that. And if they're at all emotionally intelligent, they will take the time to absorb and convert. I also think that'll be linked to performance management, where the HR function, whatever that looks like, or AI will be monitoring and going, hey, this person is exhibiting these behaviors. They're either learning, in which case that's great, or they're actually continuing to exhibit them and not changing their behaviors. Maybe this is something that we need to focus on in terms of helping this leader to perform more effectively. And then maybe a human intervention could be appropriate. But to your question about, is the 12-month program redundant? I think it's going to change a lot. I don't know whether it's completely redundant, but I think it's going to change a lot, which is a slightly fudged answer, I'm afraid.
That's okay, because we're into the agile, we start something, we monitor. Myself, I do not see it redundant. I just see its format really changing. There is one thing that worried me sometimes in the way we use AI at the moment is to put extreme emphasis on people development, because they have their own AI for themselves. They have their own return all the time. Yes, and I want to ensure that we're not moving into places where we keep creating talent 4.0, talent 5.0, but we forget to create a talented team. And for me, the 12 months leadership curriculum will still have its place, but it will have to change the format. And I will no longer I will never advise any format of over time that do not include collective group coaching, where you really learn from the dynamic. So we've got Ariane, and that is actually sending you information, Yann. She'd love to know what you think young leaders should adapt to the new style of leadership in the emerging age of new tech.
So let me just take a look at that.
You can look at them directly from your screens. I realize they have not been actually showing on stage.
No, it's all good. Thank you, Ariane, for this question. What do I think young leaders should adopt to the new styles in the emerging age of new tech?
That's a very interesting question. Knowing, while you take a moment to think about that, Yann, knowing that actually most young people, a young generation coming to work, do actually not want to be manager because they do not like that ideas. This is a really interesting question.
Yeah, I don't see the fundamentals of people leadership changing, Ariane and everyone. I think the fundamentals remain the same. However, if I look at large organizations, I think the nature of large organizations are going to shift. I think we're going to see a fragmentation, much greater fragmentation. I think we're going to see a reduction in size of large organizations. And I think we're going to see a change in how work is organized. You're going to have it where teams will form and unform depending on opportunity and depending on focus. So I think the role of a leader will be far more fungible. Leaders will be playing the role of coordinator at one moment. They'll be playing the role of maybe teacher at another moment. They'll be playing the role of mentor at another moment. It'll be a far more flexible type of role, I think. And again, moving completely away from command and control. The only environment in which command and control potentially is helpful is when you have someone who is very new, very recent into a role and doesn't have any clue about how to even begin. Then you need to have someone who's going to say, well, this is what you do, and then this is what you do, and then this is what you do. That's always been the way, kind of the situational leadership model. So I do see leadership as it's manifested shifting, and young leaders then still needing to learn the fundamentals of leadership, for me, which is around empowerment. It's around being able to let go. I think the challenge with young leadership potentially is that you come in with a lot of expert knowledge, technical knowledge potentially, and then being able to hand over that strong technical knowledge and trust other people to take care of that technical aspect, which is maybe what you've always prided yourself on, and then stepping into more of a leadership role. That could be challenging, but I think that's challenging for all leaders that are promoted from a strong functional achievement perspective and then put into a leadership role. But learning leadership is something which I'm my own leadership. I started managing people when I was 23, and I'm now very old. So it's my own leadership has evolved significantly over those decades. So I think the other thing for young leaders is be patient. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn while doing as well. Take a mentor. Mentors for me are so critical throughout my life, and that hasn't
Mastermind
changed
group.
and won't change, and yours as well.
I would actually invite not only one mentor, join a mastermind group, get collective impact. That's a very interesting one. And there is something here is, I would completely agree, the fundamental of leadership has not changed. Until now, they were manifested in a way that may not actually be the fundamental that we were seeing. They were just a manifestation. But what is definitely clear is change is happening so fast. So the speed of change is happening so fast that we can no longer use some of the classical organization model that were built for a feeling of linearity, because the change were going slow enough that we could have that feeling of linearity of start and end. And right now, we do no longer have that. So that notion of the leaders becoming an enabler, setting the situation for success, become way more interesting and important and key to a future of company. So we have this feeling that there is a shift in the posture that need to be acquired. That's, I have a feeling the young generation has it, but because it's not yet happening on the top, they have an image that is matching their shift of posture, and we need to help reconcile that and the benefits of the two.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I do worry that some of the examples of political leadership at the moment are giving a misconception of what leadership should be, so I think that's something which organizations which reflect what's happening in wider society, we just need to be conscious of.
So we were talking, we're going to do a bit of a wrap up now, cautious of the time. And we were starting with what coaching your organization needs. We talk about the classical organization. Ian, to wrap up these conversations, if a leader today realize that their team is in that transaction noise trap we've been talking about, what is the single most important shift you would invite them to make in the next 24 hours?
in the next 24 hours. I mean, I know the context was coaching, right? I think get a coach.
Get a coach.
And but get a coach that is going to challenge you. I think this is part of the risk, is that some leaders move from organization to organization with the same coach, and that coach is reinforcing their behavior. I think you need a coach that is able to say, actually, are you leading in the right way? And maybe an AI coach is also a good medium for challenging, because the AI coach should reflect the norms and values of the organization, and therefore will coach on those norms and values. Whereas sometimes a human coach aims, not in an ideal world, but can aim to please rather than to challenge. So really, I think I'm a big fan of AI coaching in conjunction with human coaching, not instead of. I think they have different purposes. But get a human coach and an AI coach is my great advice.
I'm going to keep that conversation to AI coach and combination AI coach and human coach. I'm also quite interested into both. But I notice only AI coach, you can run into hallucination very quickly. So be aware of that. Thanks, Jan, for that great advices. On my side, I'm going to leave you guys with one question. So right now, we are asking the biomachine, us people, to run at tech speeds. And my question for you is, are you currently investing in their metabolic capacity to handle that speed? Or are you just waiting for the engine to say it? If you do not like the answer to that question, just let's talk. Thanks everyone for your time, and talk to you at the next From Pressure to Capacity Live. Ciao.
Thank you.